Okay, so now let's do prepend. We'll bring up our linked list here, and what we're going to do is add an item to the beginning of the linked list. So first we want that new node to point at that 11 node, the last node in the list. So we need to set the next pointer on that node equal to something that is pointing at that node. So we'll set the next node on the new node equal to head, and that points that over there. And then we'll have head point to the new node, and that adds that into the list. And of course, this is going to be a little different if we have an empty list like this. When we add it in this situation, we're going to have head and tail point to the new node. So if you want to take a shot at coding this, then pause the video here and go over to VS Code and try to write the code. Otherwise, we're going to get into the code. So we'll begin this like this. We're going to pass it a value. And of course, the first thing we're going to do is create the node with that value. And that creates our node. So we had two situations we were going to code for if we had an empty list or a list with items in it. Let's start with the empty one. In this situation, we're just going to have head and tail point to the new node. So in order to do this, we have to test to see, is the list empty that we're inserting into? And we'll do that by saying if the length is 0, then we'll set head equal to the new node, like this, and then we'll set tail equal to the new node, like this. So now let's take this code and put it in with the rest of our code. So the other scenario we can have is that we actually have items in the list, so we'll say else, and let's build out this else statement. So we want that new node to point at that 11 node, and we'll set it equal to the head. And that does this. Then we want head to point to that new node. We'll do that with this line of code. And we'll say head equals new node. We'll move that over, and that adds that into the list. So now let's look at this code in with the rest of our code so far. And the only things left to do are to increase the length by 1. And in this case, we're going to return true. And this is an optional line of code here. And as I mentioned with append, I'm going to be using append. I'll also be using prepend in another method in a few videos that requires a Boolean to be returned. So that is why I'm going to put the return true in here. So we'll look at this code in a moment in VS Code, and then we will build a linked list that looks like this, and then we will prepend the number 1 to that list. So it'll start out with a 2 and a 3, and we will prepend a 1, and then we'll print the list out, and it should print out 1, 2, 3. All right, let's flip over to VS Code. There is our prepend method there. This is going to create that initial linked list with the 2 and the 3 in it. And then here we're going to print that out, that list with the 2 and the 3. Okay, and there is our 2 and our 3. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to paste in our line that prepends our number 1 there. And now when we do our print list, this should print out 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to run this, and that prints out 1, 2, 3. And that is our method for prepend.